Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today I'm going to be covering this book, Come and Get It. The Story of the Old Cowboy Cook by Ramon F. Adams, illustrations by Nick Eggenhofer. This book is copyright 1952. This copy is the fifth printing, 1981. Eggenhofer is also the cover artist illustrator. I bought this book used for $14 at Brave Books in El Paso. Now, I do want to say, Brave Books, the used bookstore in El Paso, Texas, is not associated, as far as I know, with Brave Books, the conservative Christian book banning organization. So, when I say Brave Books, I'm not talking about that, in my opinion, evil kind of organization. But yeah, I bought this back in June. I was on a date with my girlfriend, and I'd been looking for this book for a long time, kind of actively, going to a used bookstore and looking in the Western section for Ramon F. Adams, and then looking for Come and Get It. But on that date in June, I wasn't thinking of any books in particular, just looking through. There's a book somewhere on a shelf behind me that's about Spanglish, and I also got this book at the same time as that book. And while on that date, I turned around at the Western shelf, and there it was, right there, Come and Get It. Almost faded for me. I'm always looking for it. I'm actively looking for it. I don't find it. The one day I'm not actively looking for it, my mind's on something else, I turn around, boom, there it is. Now, I say I was looking for it, and that's because back in 2018 and 2019, when I was working at Cottonwood Gulch Expeditions up in central New Mexico, I found this book in their library. And their library had a lot of interesting Westerns in general. And it's there that I read The Virginian for the first time. But I'm digressing a bit. I read Come and Get It at the time, and they had a couple copies, but I wanted one for myself and could never find it. And I didn't want to look online for it. I wanted to find this used organically. Now, the book itself is separated into various chapters and various parts. So, the contents here says part 1 is the wagon and the cook. Part 2 is the chuck, and part 3 is a day with the cook. And the foreword, Ramon F. Adams is a really fun author to read, and the foreword in particular is uniquely interesting. It opens with the title, Come and Get It! This familiar and welcome call of the old range and trail is dimming with the years. The man who issued the summons, the old range cook, has been too long overlooked by writers of Western fact and fiction. Scattered and meager mention of him has been made, but as yet there has been no complete record of his life, his character, or his importance in the development of the West except in the memories of the men who came under his direct influence. And he's right. A lot of those Westerns, you see those movies, you read those books, and it's the cowboy who's front and center, or the lawman, or the rancher. And it's very rarely the other members of the ranching organization. But this book emphasizes the cook. And really, in any large organization, a multi-day expedition, whether it's in the Navy, whether it's in the Army, whether it's a cowboy out for months at a time, whether it's a modern Western expedition sort of thing, the cook really reigns supreme. And that cook is going to organize a lot of packing. So like when I was learning recreation and parks management, one of the things we did was a course on like backpacking skills, and the the teachers were the ones managing the food. They had the menu, they had all of that, but they were the ones directing who was carrying what food, and were double checking where that food was being packed in the backpack. And then with Cottonwood Gulch expeditions, the cook is really the one who controls the packing of all of the bags. So they pack up all of the compartments with their food and everything like that first, where the water goes. The personal goods do not matter so much as they are in charge of their truck, their goods, all of the group belongings, all of that group gear, setting up the kitchen when we get to somewhere. That is all classically Western. And on these expeditions, these cowboys would be out for months at a time. The chuck wagon would be important because all of the coffee is stored there, all of the food, all of the snacks. As they describe in this book, if a cowboy needed some water and salt in his diet, he would go back to the cowboy cook, and he would get a can of tomatoes, and he would drink both the tomato juice and eat the tomatoes, and that would be a snack for him. But he would have to go find the cook, and wherever that cook wagon had moved to actually get that food. And, part of the cook's job is to cook, and so while he's moving, he would have to be looking out for firewood, especially in the plains. That's not necessarily common. But wherever the cook sets up camp is where everyone else has to go, because the cook's not moving his food hundreds of feet through all that dust to give it to someone. The cowboy has to come to him. And a lot of that is covered in this book. To enlighten the younger generation and to keep his memory alive, I would like to place between permanent covers the story of this unusual character, his functions, the food he served, and his manner of preparing it. No less interesting is the wagon he commanded, its evolution, and the influence it exercised in the growth of the West's great cattle industry, as well as its place in the hearts of the men who called it home. Although there are still a few chuck wagons in operations upon the larger ranches today, they have become so scarce that one is rarely seen except in a museum or in a rodeo parade. I think when he was talking about that, when he was interviewing these cowboys for this book in the 50s, that was true. But nowadays, you look on YouTube, and there's a couple cowboy cooks who are on YouTube, and one in particular, Cowboy Kent Rollins, or Cowboy Cook Kent Rollins, I think his name is, has a pretty big YouTube following where he posts recipes from the chuck wagon, from the range oven, for how to cook these various cowboy meals. And in some of his videos, he expresses some of the history of the cowboy cook. Ramon F. Adams was writing 70 years ago, maybe a bit more. And the times have changed where we are starting to see the importance of that character in the history of the cowboys, and also some people uplifting that image because it is something unique. And, there's so many cowboys out there. We already know what they look like, but the cowboy cooks, if you can present yourself well enough, you can become an influencer to some degree. And so that's a really good example of one of those historical cowboy cooks. And I don't know who Rollins learned from, what that lineage of cowboy cooks was that brought him to the modern day, but he's an older gentleman, and I don't know if he was working too much in the 70s or 80s, but if the person before him lived long and kept on doing their job, it could only be 3 or 4 generations of cowboy cooks separating the modern influencer from the cowboy cooks that Ramon F. Adams discusses in this book. The illustrations in this book are another really cool part about it, and I'll show you one of them right now. That picture goes to show some of this, how all these different parts, you look through the book and here's one of the pictures. On part 2, the chuck. There's a lot of history in this book. I can only really cover so much of it in a 15 to 20 minute video, but one of them is on page 54. Many were the slang titles for the cook also. Although his most common title was simply Cookie, he was called by many others, such as Cusi, from the Spanish cocinero, meaning cook, bean master, belly cheater, biscuit roller, dinero, dough belly, dough boxer, dough puncher, dough roller, dough wrangler, greasy belly, grub spoiler, grub worm, gut robber, pot hooks, pot rustler, chefy, sop and taters, sourdough, Sally, old woman, or old lady, though the language he used could never be attributed to a lady. Many of the uncomplimentary names above were never used to his face, but spoken behind his back. Sometimes a Chinese cook was employed at the ranch. Usually he was merely called John or Joe, but more often referred to as that damned, obviously the slur for Chinese people. And just a couple pages before, we get this portion. Some cooks used the simple chuck or grub pile because the words were short and easy to shout. Others stuck to the common, come and get it. The more windy ones used calls such as, grub pile, come a-runnin', fellers. It's all right with me. Grab a plate and growl. Boneheads, boneheads, take it away. Grab her, boys, or I'll throw her out. Or grab it now, or I'll spit in the skillet. The summons to breakfast might differ with such calls as roll out while she's hot, or wake up snakes and bite a biscuit. The poetic cook might break forth with bacon in the pan, coffee in the pot, come up and get it while it's hot. Or wake up Jacob, day's a breakin', beans in the pot and sourdough's a bakin'. Perhaps some old cooks were religiously inclined, and they put some of this sentiment into their calls. To quote James Cook, a cheery voice ringing out at daybreak, shouting, roll out there, fellers, and hear the little birdies sing their praises to God, and arise and shine and give God the glory, would make the most crusty Waddy grin as he crawled out to partake of his morning meal, even when he was extremely short on sleep. And there's a footnote there that cites James Cook, 50 Years on the Old Frontier, page 39. That book being New Haven, Yale University Press, 1923. So there were other people writing about it, but the footnotes imply it is very few and far between. And, my dad used to wake up me and my siblings before my grandparents moved out to help him raise us. And one of the things he would do is that rise and shine and give God your glory. One of those kinds of things that is called out in this book as maybe the more religious-minded cooks would sing. And so there was a whole song to that one, but I'm not gonna recite any of it here. But that's the kind of thing those cowboy cooks were renowned for. And I would never have known that except through reading this book. One of these that I really enjoyed, there's a section here in chapter 8, Miscellany, that says, food at the chuck wagon has always been simple, but in the words of an old Spanish proverb, a buena hambre no hay el pan duro, to good hunger there is no hard bread. In the days of the first cow hunts, men were satisfied with meat, bread, and coffee, and they got that fare 3 times daily. And I alluded to it earlier. It says here, tomatoes were not only served as a food, but were most satisfying as a thirst quencher, allaying thirst even longer than water. A man going on a dry ride would likely take a can or 2 of tomatoes along. Also, a man coming in from such a ride would go to the wagon and open up a can of tomatoes to cut the dust and thirst. It became more or less a custom for the cowboy to climb the wagon wheel and help himself to such a treat if he wanted it. This being about the only time he could paw around in the wagon without hearing from the cook. Now, another part of this book that I haven't mentioned yet is that, and I don't think it's mentioned on the cover, each chapter opens with some poetry and rhyme from a poet named Tex Taylor. And there's a couple that are really sweet, and I'm not going to read all of them, but in chapter 5, Arbuckles and Sourdoughs, the subtitle of which is Goin' Round a Coffee Pot, Huntin' the Handle would cover the extent of some folks' travel. One of those rhymes from Tex Taylor. The preceding page has a paragraph or two from Tex Taylor. Them words Arbuckle brothers on a sack of coffee beans saved the West and all of Texas from them Injuns and their schemes. When the wagon left headquarters for the roundup spring and fall, it was sure to carry with it lots of coffee for us all. The boys sure liked their coffee ever mornin', noon, and night, and even in between times when the wagon was in sight. The coffee pot there by the fire was full of cookies brew, hot and black and strong enough to float an old horseshoe. There's another institution that the old chuck wagon's got. It's a most important item, that sourdough risin' crock. Our old cookie sure can make 'em and they're plenty fit to eat. Just reach in that Dutch oven, son, they're mighty hard to beat. When the weather's cold and fallin', you can bit your bottom dollar. Cookies got our buckles warmin' and sourdoughs when you holler. And that's one of those, this chapter really emphasizes the coffee. And coffee was a vital part of the cowboys' diet. And they have this section here. Teddy Blue told a story about a Texas cowboy who was working in Montana. When he rode into a roundup camp at dinner time and they passed him the sugar, he said, "No thanks, I don't take salt in my coffee." He had never seen sugar before, only sorghum syrup. Which, in another chapter, they allude to molasses being a constant flavor enhancer for coffee, but never sugar. Grain sugar, granulated sugar, wasn't common on the range at that time. Even other things like canned milk wasn't really a thing. So there were a lot of differences in the way those wild cowboys and their cooks would have prepared and consumed coffee compared to how we think of it nowadays. And the accompanying picture is really great. And then there's this portion. Few people today know what a package of Arbuckles looked like, and even many of the old cowmen have forgotten its appearance. For that reason, it seems fitting to include here some pertinent facts about this once famous beverage. In the days before and immediately after the Civil War, coffee came packed green. The housewife did her own roasting in oven or skillet. The Arbuckle brothers, wholesale grocers of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, conceived the idea of shipping coffee already roasted. They developed a process of coating the roasted beans with a mixture of sugar and egg whites to seal in the flavor and keep it fresh. The demand for this roasted coffee was so great that the Arbuckles became known as coffee specialists, and cowmen eventually began worrying about what they would do for coffee if the Arbuckles died. This coffee was shipped in cases of 1-pound bags. The ranch owner kept a supply on hand at all times. When the chuck wagon loaded out for the roundup, plenty of coffee was taken along. There was no stinting on this item if the men were to do good work and be contented. And there's a lot of citations in this book. There's a lot of those older stories, those kinds of legends and stories passed down from the 1860s, compiled when he was writing this in the 1940s. All sorts of those legends and myths and stories passed down orally through the different generations of cowmen. This is a fascinating history book, but it is presented in a way that doesn't make it feel like a history book. But all those citations and everything, the interviews, it is very clearly well researched. But Ramon Adams puts it together in such a brilliant package that you can only have fun while reading this. And I've only covered at most 2, maybe 3 pages worth of text in this book. There's 170 pages. And a lot of that is pictures, a lot of that's poems, a lot of that's not just the meat of the book, the content of the book. There's a lot of interesting material in here. And so I've really enjoyed this book. I paid $14 for it, and I think I would have paid for it new if I had gone another year without finding this book. It really is just that important and that good of a read. I don't know that you can find it new anywhere nowadays, but if you find this in the Western section of a used bookstore, I would highly recommend picking this up and at least reading a few pages of it. I guarantee you, if you pick this up, when you start reading a few pages, it'll turn into 10, it'll turn into 20, and then you'll realize I've read 2 or 3 chapters. It's that good of a book. It's a real page turner. So, I really love Come and Get It, not just for the context of how I found it, of the first times I read it, and the passion I have for that workplace. I love it because the content is really that good. And I think if you pick this up, for whatever reasons you have for getting it, you're going to enjoy Come and Get It just as much as I have. My name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.